A little girl wakes up in a hospital, terrified and alone. When she whispers just two haunting words to the doctor, his next move shocks everyone. He locks down the entire hospital. What secret does she hold? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe if you're ready for a story you won't forget. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights filled the small hospital room. Lucinda stirred awake, her tiny hands clutching the coarse fabric of the blanket. She blinked, her hazel eyes wide and glassy, scanning her surroundings. The room was unfamiliar: white walls, a single chair, and a window with the blinds half drawn, casting fractured light across the floor. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and her thoughts were a tangle of confusion. How had she gotten here? Where was she? More importantly, where was her family? A nurse entered, her smile kind but guarded. "Good morning, sweetie. Do you remember your name?" Lucinda nodded faintly. "Lucinda," she whispered, her voice raspy as if she hadn't spoken in days. The nurse's expression softened. "That's a good start. Do you remember what happened?" Lucinda hesitated. The images in her mind were like shattered glass, fragmented and unclear. She shook her head, her lip trembling. "No," she murmured. Dr. Trevor Langston, a tall man with sharp features softened by compassionate eyes, walked in, clipboard in hand. His white coat swayed slightly as he moved closer. "Hi, Lucinda. I'm Dr. Trevor. Can I ask you a few questions?" She nodded cautiously. "Do you know where your parents are? Or who brought you here?" Lucinda froze. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She didn't know. The thought terrified her. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. Dr. Trevor exchanged a glance with the nurse, his brows furrowing. He crouched down to meet her at eye level, his tone gentle but probing. "It's okay, Lucinda. You're safe here. But if there's anything at all, that you remember, it might help us." The room was silent, save for the faint beeping of machines in the background. Lucinda stared at him, her small frame tense. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned closer to him and whispered two chilling words. "He's coming." Dr. Trevor stiffened. His eyes searched hers, trying to make sense of the fear that seemed to radiate from her tiny body. "Who's coming, Lucinda?" She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze drifted to the door, her lips pressing into a tight line. Trevor straightened, his heart pounding. He turned to the nurse. "Lock down the hospital. Now." "What?" "But. Now." His voice was firm, leaving no room for debate. The nurse ran to alert security as Dr. Trevor picked up his phone, his mind racing. The fear in Lucinda's voice wasn't just a child's imagination. Something, or someone, was coming. And whatever it was, it wouldn't stop until it reached her. The hospital buzzed with tension as the lockdown was initiated. Doors clicked shut, security guards were stationed at every entrance, and the hallways echoed with the distant hum of hushed voices. Dr. Trevor stood in the corner of his office, his mind spinning as he processed Lucinda's cryptic warning. Her words, "he's coming," reverberated in his thoughts, each repetition raising more questions than answers. Trevor was not just any doctor. Before joining the medical field, he had served as a federal investigator specializing in missing children's cases. Those years had left a scar on him, a deep one he thought he'd buried beneath his new life. But Lucinda's frightened eyes brought it all rushing back, as if reopening an old wound. He pulled open a locked drawer in his desk and retrieved a battered file folder. It was marked with a single name in bold, black letters, the St. Vincent's Orphanage case. 10 years ago, 5 children had vanished from the St. Vincent's Orphanage without a trace. It was one of Trevor's last cases before he left law enforcement. He had pursued every lead, interviewed every potential witness, and even uncovered a trail of suspicious activity tied to powerful figures. But the case had gone cold, and the missing children were never found. Until now, or so he suspected. Trevor flipped through the old documents, pausing on one photograph in particular. A grainy black and white image of a little girl with wide hazel eyes and a small scar above her left eyebrow. Her name was Evelyn White. She had been 5 years old when she disappeared, exactly Lucinda's age now. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. It was Nurse Hannah, the one who had been tending to Lucinda. "Dr. Trevor, we have a situation." "What is it?" he asked sharply. "The cameras. Security just reviewed footage from earlier today. Someone entered the building before the lockdown, a man, wearing black. He bypassed the front desk and disappeared into the lower floors." Trevor's grip on the phone tightened. "What does he look like?" "Tall, lean, with a hood over his face. Security says it matches a description from one of your old cases." Trevor's heart sank. "Send me the footage." Moments later, the video played on his laptop. The image was grainy, but it was enough. A figure moved swiftly down a dimly lit hallway, his movements precise and deliberate. Trevor paused the frame, zooming in on the man's face. His hood obscured most of it, but Trevor recognized the angular jawline and sharp features. "Carlos Weaver," he muttered under his breath, his voice laced with disbelief. Weaver was a name that had haunted him for years. A man tied to the St. Vincent's case, suspected of being involved in the children's disappearance but never charged due to lack of evidence. Why would Weaver come here? And why now? Trevor closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. If Weaver was in the building, then this wasn't a coincidence. Lucinda wasn't just any lost child, she was a key to something far bigger. But what? He glanced at the photograph of Evelyn White one last time, then at the closed door of his office. Somewhere down the hall, Lucinda sat alone, clutching her blanket, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Trevor stood and grabbed his coat. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The shadows of his past were no longer content to stay buried. They were here, alive, and they had found him once again. The hospital felt unnervingly still as Dr. Trevor walked briskly through the hallways. The lockdown was in full effect, with nurses and staff huddled in small groups, exchanging anxious glances. Security guards patrolled the main corridors, their radios crackling with updates. Despite the precautions, Trevor couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. He stopped outside Lucinda's room. Nurse Hannah stood guard, her expression tense. "She's calm for now," she said softly, "but she keeps staring at the door, like she's waiting for something." Trevor nodded and entered the room. Lucinda sat cross-legged on the bed, the blanket draped over her small shoulders like a shield. Her hazel eyes darted to Trevor as he approached. "Lucinda," he began, kneeling beside her, "can you tell me more about the man you mentioned? The one who's coming?" She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "He's not like you," she whispered. "He's dark." "Dark? What do you mean?" Trevor pressed gently. Lucinda looked away, her gaze fixed on the window. "He doesn't like the light. He hides in the shadows. He said he would come for me." Trevor's chest tightened. "When did he say this? Was it before you came here?" Lucinda nodded slowly. "He was there when I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I was here. I don't know how." Her fragmented words only deepened the mystery. Before Trevor could ask more, his pager buzzed sharply at his hip. He stood and glanced at it. "Come to the security room. Urgent." "Stay here," he told Lucinda, his tone firm but kind. "I'll be back soon." In the security room, Trevor found the head of hospital security, Mr. Jensen, poring over a live feed from the cameras. The grainy footage showed the man in black, Carlos Weaver, moving methodically through the hospital's lower levels. He had reached the utility corridors near the basement, a restricted area few people even knew existed. "What's down there?" Trevor asked, leaning over Jensen's shoulder. Mostly storage. Old equipment, files, nothing anyone would want, Jensen replied, though his voice carried uncertainty. Trevor frowned. What about exits? Could he be trying to escape? Jensen shook his head. No way out from there. If he's down there, he's trapped. Trapped, or hiding. Trevor's gut told him it wasn't that simple. Can we send guards to intercept him? Jensen hesitated. We can, but the place is a maze. If he's armed, it could get dangerous. Trevor glanced at the screen again. Weaver's movements were deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. I'll go, he said suddenly. Doctor, you're not trained for. I know him, Trevor interrupted. If he's here for Lucinda, I need to know why. Trevor descended into the basement alone, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The air was colder here, damp and thick with the scent of mildew. The flickering overhead lights cast long, wavering shadows that danced unsettlingly on the walls. As he moved deeper into the maze of corridors, he felt the weight of the past pressing down on him. This wasn't the first time he had walked into the unknown chasing Weaver. Back then, it had ended in failure. He couldn't let that happen again. He turned a corner and froze. Ahead of him, at the end of the hallway, stood Carlos Weaver. The man's hood was pushed back, revealing his face, gaunt and weathered, with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through Trevor. You shouldn't have followed me, Weaver said, his voice low and gravelly. Trevor stepped forward, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Why are you here, Carlos? What do you want with Lucinda? Weaver tilted his head, a strange smirk playing on his lips. Lucinda? Is that what you're calling her now? He took a step closer, his movements slow but deliberate. You don't even know who she is, do you? Trevor's fists clenched. She's a child who needs help. If you think. She's not just a child, Weaver interrupted, his voice rising. She's the key to everything. Before Trevor could respond, a sudden noise, metal scraping against concrete, echoed from behind him. He turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. When he looked back, Weaver was gone. The shadows seemed to grow darker, closing in around him. Trevor stood there, his mind racing. Lucinda wasn't just a lost child. Weaver's cryptic words suggested something far more sinister, and far more dangerous, was at play. Doctor. Trevor stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway, Weaver's parting words echoing in his mind, she's the key to everything. The implications churned his stomach. What could a little girl like Lucinda possibly be a key to? His thoughts raced as he retraced his steps toward the stairs, leaving the oppressive silence of the basement behind. Back in Lucinda's room, Nurse Hannah greeted him with a worried look. She's been asking for you, she said, stepping aside. Trevor entered and found Lucinda sitting upright on the bed, her hazel eyes locked on the doorway as if she had been expecting him. He's closer now, she whispered before he could even speak. Trevor approached her cautiously. Lucinda, do you know where he's going? Or what he wants? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and grabbed his hand, her tiny fingers trembling. You have to find her, she said softly. Find who? Trevor asked, kneeling beside her. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart was pounding. The girl, Lucinda replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She's locked away. He wants to save her, but he's too late. Trevor frowned. What girl? Where is she? Lucinda's gaze shifted to the floor. Below. In the dark. Trevor's pulse quickened as he left Lucinda's room. He found Nurse Hannah waiting outside. Stay with her, he instructed. Don't let anyone in except me. Where are you going? She asked, her voice tinged with fear. Downstairs, Trevor said, already moving toward the elevator. There's something I need to see. The elevator ride to the basement felt interminable, the hum of the machinery amplified in the enclosed space. When the doors slid open, Trevor stepped out into the cold, silent corridor. He carried a flashlight this time, the beam slicing through the darkness as he made his way deeper into the maze of storage rooms and forgotten spaces. Lucinda's words replayed in his mind. Below. In the dark. She had described the girl with an eerie certainty, as if she had seen her. But how could that be possible? Trevor stopped at a heavy metal door marked with a faded sign, restricted access. The lock was old and rusted, but it looked recently tampered with. Scratches around the keyhole suggested someone had forced it open. He pushed the door, and it groaned on its hinges, revealing a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward. The air was colder here, damp and heavy with the scent of decay. Trevor descended cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the steps ahead. At the bottom, he found another door. This one was sturdier, reinforced with thick metal bars. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked. The sound echoed hollowly, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the other side of the door. "Hello?" Trevor called, his voice steady but loud enough to be heard. The tapping stopped. A few seconds passed, and then a weak voice responded, "Help." Trevor's stomach twisted. The voice was faint but unmistakably that of a child. He inspected the door, his hands running over the cold metal. There was no visible lock, but it was secured from the other side. He stepped back and kicked at it with all his strength. The door shuddered but didn't budge. "Hold on," he shouted. "I'm going to get you out." As he turned to look for something to pry the door open, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, his flashlight landing on Carlos Weaver. The man stood at the bottom of the stairs, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Don't," Weaver said, his voice calm but firm. "If you open that door without knowing the truth, you'll make it worse." "What truth?" Trevor demanded, his flashlight fixed on Weaver's face. "There's a child in there." Weaver stepped closer, lowering his hands. "She's not just a child," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. "She's the last piece of the puzzle. They kept her hidden because they're afraid of what she knows." "Who's they?" Trevor asked, his frustration boiling over. "And why are you here?" Weaver hesitated, his jaw tightening. "The people who took her. The ones who took all of them. They're part of something bigger than you can imagine. And if we don't act fast, they'll take her again." Trevor stared at him, torn between suspicion and the undeniable urgency in Weaver's voice. Finally, he made a decision. "Help me open the door," he said. "If what you're saying is true, then we need to get her out of here." Weaver nodded and stepped forward. Together, they forced the door open, the metal groaning in protest. The room beyond was small and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the corner, huddled beneath a thin blanket, was a young girl. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met Trevor's as he stepped inside. "It's okay," Trevor said softly, kneeling in front of her. "You're safe now." But as the girl reached out to take his hand, Trevor felt a chill run down his spine. Something about her gaze, so familiar and yet so unsettling, made him realize that the answers they sought were only beginning to reveal themselves. The young girl trembled as Trevor wrapped a blanket around her frail shoulders. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin pale, but her eyes, those same piercing hazel eyes as Lucinda's, held a quiet strength. Trevor's mind raced as he tried to piece together how she ended up locked away in such a place. Beside him, Carlos Weaver stood silently, his gaze fixed on the girl. "What's your name?" Trevor asked gently. The girl hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eleanor." Trevor nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "It's okay, Eleanor. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." But Weaver stepped forward, his tone sharp. No. She's not safe, not yet. Trevor shot him a glare. What do you mean? She's a child. She needs medical attention, not more hiding. Weaver crouched down to Eleanor's level, his voice soft but urgent. Do you remember me, Eleanor? The girl's eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering in her expression. She nodded. Trevor's jaw tightened. What's going on, Weaver? Start talking, or I'm calling the authorities right now. Weaver stood, his face etched with frustration. You think the authorities can help? They're the ones who covered this up in the first place. Trevor took a step closer, his fists clenched. Enough with the cryptic nonsense. Explain. Weaver sighed, his shoulders slumping as if carrying the weight of the world. 10 years ago, a group of powerful people began using children from orphanages like St. Vincent's for experiments. They claimed it was for medical advancements, but it was darker than that. They were trying to unlock something they called the catalyst. Trevor frowned. What does that have to do with Eleanor and Lucinda? They're part of the same group, Weaver said grimly. The children they took, Eleanor, Lucinda, and the others, were chosen because of a genetic anomaly. The experiments they performed on them were supposed to enhance their abilities, but most of the children didn't survive. Trevor's stomach churned. And you? What was your role in all this? I was hired to transport the kids, Weaver admitted, his voice heavy with regret. But when I realized what they were doing, I couldn't stand by and watch. I took the surviving children and ran. Trevor's eyes narrowed. So, you're telling me you're the good guy now? Weaver's gaze was unflinching. Believe what you want. I've spent the last 10 years trying to keep them safe. But every time I think I've gotten away, they find us. That's why I had to come here. They know where Eleanor and Lucinda are. Trevor's head spun as he processed the information. If Weaver was telling the truth, then the danger was far greater than he'd imagined. Why didn't you go to the police? Or the FBI? Weaver let out a bitter laugh. You think I didn't try? Every time, the trail led back to the same corrupt system. These people own the authorities. They own everything. Eleanor tugged on Trevor's sleeve, drawing his attention back to her. They're coming, she whispered, her voice shaking. Trevor's blood ran cold. Who's coming? Weaver answered before she could. The retrieval team. They always send one when a location is compromised. We have to move, now. The trio made their way back through the maze of corridors, Eleanor clinging to Trevor's hand as Weaver took the lead. Trevor's flashlight cut through the darkness, but every shadow seemed alive with menace. The hospital above was supposed to be on lockdown, but if what Weaver said was true, that wouldn't stop whoever was coming for them. As they reached the stairwell, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere above. Trevor froze, his flashlight beam darting toward the source of the noise. They're here, Weaver muttered, pulling a small handgun from his jacket. Trevor stared at him in disbelief. You're armed. Wouldn't you be, in my position? Weaver retorted. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Trevor's heart pounded as he shielded Eleanor behind him. We can't fight them off. There's got to be another way out. Weaver nodded. Follow me. They retraced their steps to an old service tunnel, a narrow passage that hadn't been used in years. The air was damp and thick with dust, but it offered a glimmer of hope. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the sound of the footsteps faded. Where does this lead? Trevor asked. To the parking garage, Weaver replied. If we're lucky, we can steal a car and get out before they catch on. Lucky, Trevor muttered. Great. Eleanor clutched his hand tighter, her small voice breaking the tension. I don't want to go back. Trevor crouched down, meeting her tearful gaze. You're not going back, he said firmly. I promise. Weaver glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Keep that promise, Langston. Because if you don't, they'll destroy her, and everyone else. Trevor didn't reply, but his resolve hardened. He didn't fully trust Weaver, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let anyone harm Eleanor or Lucinda. Not while he still had a say in it. The air in the service tunnel grew colder as Trevor, Weaver, and Eleanor pressed forward. The dim glow of Trevor's flashlight barely lit the path ahead, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. Eleanor's small hand remained clutched in Trevor's, her trembling grip a reminder of the stakes they faced. "Are we close?" Trevor asked, his voice a harsh whisper. "Almost," Weaver replied, glancing back. His expression was tense, his eyes darting between the group and the darkness behind them. "But we're not out of danger yet." As they rounded a corner, a faint light appeared in the distance. Weaver stopped abruptly, raising his hand to signal silence. Trevor crouched down next to Eleanor, shielding her from view as Weaver crept ahead to scout. Seconds stretched into eternity before Weaver returned, his face grim. "There's a van parked near the garage exit," he whispered. "It's them." Trevor's jaw tightened. "You're sure?" Weaver nodded. "I've seen their setup before. Unmarked vehicles, tinted windows, and always at least 3 operatives. They'll have the exits covered." Trevor exhaled sharply, glancing at Eleanor. The girl's wide eyes met his, filled with fear but also a strange, quiet determination. He turned back to Weaver. "So what's the plan? We can't just walk out there." Weaver's gaze hardened. "I'll create a diversion. While they're focused on me, you take Eleanor and head to the north stairwell. It leads to the rooftop. From there, you can cross to the adjacent building." "That's suicide," Trevor said flatly. "They'll gun you down before you take 2 steps." Weaver's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Maybe. But they want me alive more than dead. I'm the loose end they couldn't tie up. If I play my cards right, I'll buy you enough time." Before Trevor could argue, Eleanor tugged on his sleeve. "Don't let him go alone," she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried a surprising weight. "They'll hurt him if they catch him." Trevor hesitated. He didn't trust Weaver entirely, but the man's willingness to sacrifice himself for Eleanor couldn't be ignored. Finally, Trevor nodded. "We do this together." Weaver looked surprised but didn't argue. "Fine. But if we're going to stand a chance, you'll need to know the full story." As they huddled in the shadows, Weaver explained the depth of the conspiracy. The experiments weren't just about genetic anomalies, they were part of a larger, covert operation run by a pharmaceutical conglomerate called Genesis Corporation. Using orphan children as subjects, Genesis aimed to unlock dormant abilities hidden within the human genome. The project, codenamed Catalyst, sought to create individuals with enhanced cognitive and physical abilities. They were playing God, Weaver said bitterly. And they didn't care how many lives they destroyed in the process. "Why children?" Trevor asked, his stomach churning. "Because their genes are more malleable," Weaver explained. "They wanted subjects who hadn't fully developed, ones they could shape to their will. But the process was brutal. Most of the kids didn't survive." Trevor's heart sank. "And the ones who did? They became targets," Weaver said. "Genesis wanted to cover their tracks, erase any evidence of what they'd done. The survivors were either recaptured or killed." Trevor glanced at Eleanor, who was staring at the floor, her small hands clenched into fists. "And Lucinda? Eleanor? Why are they so important?" Weaver's eyes softened as he looked at the girl. "Because they're the only 2 left. And Eleanor, she remembers everything." Eleanor looked up at that, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. "They hurt us," she said quietly. "They made us sick, and then they made us different." "What do you mean?" Trevor asked gently. Eleanor hesitated, then raised her hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flashlight in Trevor's hand flickered, the beam dimming and brightening in rapid succession. Trevor's breath caught. How? They changed me, Eleanor whispered. I can feel things, machines, electricity. I can make them stop. Trevor stared at her, his mind reeling. If Genesis had succeeded in creating children with abilities like this, it explained why they were so desperate to capture her. Eleanor wasn't just evidence of their crimes, she was proof that their experiments worked. Before Trevor could process what he'd learned, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Weaver motioned for silence, pulling a handgun from his jacket. They're moving in, he whispered. Trevor nodded, his grip tightening on Eleanor's hand. What now? Weaver's jaw clenched. We stick to the plan. But if I don't make it? You'll make it, Trevor interrupted. We both will. Now let's go. With that, they moved forward, the faint glow of the garage lights growing brighter with each step. Trevor's heart pounded as they neared the exit, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. The harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage reflected off the concrete walls, creating long, jagged shadows. Trevor's pulse quickened as he peered around the corner, spotting the unmarked van Weaver had described. 3 figures, clad in black tactical gear, stood near the vehicle, their movements calculated and deliberate. Each carried a sidearm, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. We need to stay out of sight, Trevor whispered, crouching low. Eleanor pressed close to him, her small frame trembling against his side. Weaver scanned the garage, his face set with grim determination. I'll draw their attention. Stick to the plan. When they chase me, you take the north stairwell and don't stop until you're on the rooftop. Trevor shook his head. We're not leaving you behind. Weaver gave a bitter smile. You don't have a choice. They'll follow me, I'm the one they really want. I'll give you time to get her out. Before Trevor could argue, Weaver moved swiftly into the open, his footsteps echoing through the garage. He raised his gun and fired 2 warning shots into the air. The operatives snapped to attention, drawing their weapons and shouting commands. There, one of them yelled, pointing in Weaver's direction. All 3 began pursuing him, their boots pounding against the concrete as Weaver darted between parked cars, leading them away from Trevor and Eleanor. Trevor hesitated for only a moment before pulling Eleanor to her feet. Come on, he said, his voice firm but gentle. We have to move. They slipped into the north stairwell, climbing as quickly and quietly as they could. The narrow space was lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, the sound of their footsteps amplified by the enclosed walls. Eleanor's breathing was shallow, and Trevor could feel her fear radiating off her. Are you okay? He asked as they reached the 3rd floor. She nodded, though her wide eyes betrayed her terror. I'm scared, she admitted. Trevor knelt in front of her, placing his hands on her small shoulders. I know, he said softly. But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. We're going to get through this, together. You're stronger than you think, Eleanor. The girl stared at him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Okay. Trevor smiled and stood, taking her hand again. Let's keep going. On the rooftop, the wind whipped around them, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city. The adjacent building was just a few feet away, separated by a narrow gap. Trevor's heart sank as he realized they would have to jump. Can you do it? He asked Eleanor, crouching down to her level. She looked at the gap, her face pale but resolute. I think so. Trevor nodded. I'll go first. Then I'll help you. He stepped back, taking a deep breath before running toward the edge. The jump was short but harrowing, and his stomach lurched as he landed on the other side, stumbling slightly but keeping his balance. He turned and held out his arms. Okay, Eleanor, your turn. You can do this. The girl hesitated for a moment, then ran forward and leapt. Trevor caught her easily, pulling her into a tight hug as her small arms wrapped around his neck. "Good job," he said, his voice filled with relief. "You're amazing." Before they could catch their breath, the sound of gunfire echoed from the parking garage below. Trevor's stomach twisted. Weaver was still down there, holding off the operatives to buy them time. "We can't just leave him," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Trevor looked at her, his mind racing. Weaver had risked everything to protect her, and now he was alone against armed professionals. But Trevor also knew that their priority had to be Eleanor's safety. The stakes were too high. "I'll find him," Trevor said after a moment. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." He scanned the adjacent rooftop and spotted a maintenance door leading into the building. "Come on," he said, guiding Eleanor toward it. The door opened easily, revealing a dimly lit stairwell. "Stay here. I'll come back for you." Eleanor grabbed his hand, her eyes pleading. "Don't let them hurt him." "I won't," Trevor promised, his voice steady. "Stay hidden. I'll be back soon." Trevor retraced his steps to the parking garage, his heart pounding as he moved cautiously through the shadows. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. He crouched behind a row of parked cars, scanning the area for any sign of Weaver or the operatives. Then he saw him. Weaver was on the ground, his gun discarded a few feet away. One of the operatives stood over him, speaking into a radio. Trevor couldn't make out the words, but it was clear they were calling for reinforcements. Trevor's fists clenched. He couldn't let them take Weaver, not if what he'd said about Genesis was true. Spotting a loose piece of concrete nearby, Trevor picked it up and hurled it toward the far end of the garage. The sound of it shattering against the wall drew the operatives' attention, and they moved cautiously toward the noise. Taking advantage of the distraction, Trevor sprinted toward Weaver, crouching beside him. "Can you move?" he whispered. Weaver groaned, his face pale but determined. "Yeah. Just give me a second." Trevor helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved toward the stairwell. The operatives quickly realized the ruse, shouting as they gave chase. Trevor and Weaver barely made it to the stairwell, slamming the door shut behind them. "Thanks," Weaver muttered as they ascended the stairs. "Don't thank me yet," Trevor replied. "We're not out of this." The stairwell echoed with the sound of their hurried footsteps as Trevor half-carried Weaver up flight after flight. The older man winced with each step, clutching his side where blood seeped through his jacket. Despite his condition, Weaver pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that Eleanor and Lucinda's lives hung in the balance. "We're close," Trevor whispered. "Just hold on." As they reached the rooftop door, Trevor pushed it open, revealing the night sky above. Eleanor was where he had left her, crouched behind a vent, her small figure illuminated by the faint glow of city lights. Her face lit up with relief when she saw them. "You're okay," she cried, running to meet them. Trevor knelt down, wrapping his arms around her. "I told you I'd come back," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Weaver leaned against the doorframe, his breathing labored. "We don't have much time. They'll regroup soon." Trevor nodded, his mind racing. "What's the plan now? We can't keep running forever." Weaver's expression hardened. "We don't run. We expose them." As the trio made their way across the rooftop, Weaver explained the next step. He had been gathering evidence against Genesis for years, files, testimonies, and recordings that revealed the corporation's crimes. The data was stored on an encrypted drive hidden nearby. If they could retrieve it and get it to the press, they could bring the conspiracy crashing down. "There's a safe house a few blocks from here," Weaver said. "The drive is there. But we'll have to move fast." Trevor helped him down the fire escape, Eleanor following close behind. The streets below were eerily quiet, but Trevor knew the operatives wouldn't be far behind. Every shadow seemed to hold danger, every sound a potential threat. As they approached the safe house, a nondescript building tucked between two warehouses, Weaver suddenly stopped, his hand raised in warning. "What is it?" Trevor asked. "They're here," Weaver muttered, scanning the street. His voice was tense. "They're watching the house." Trevor's stomach sank. "Then how do we get in?" Weaver thought for a moment, then turned to Eleanor. "You said you can affect machines, right? Can you disable their communications?" Eleanor hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. I think so." Weaver knelt in front of her, his expression softening. "Listen to me. You're stronger than they think. You can do this. Just focus, and we'll be right here with you." Eleanor nodded, her fear giving way to determination. She closed her eyes, her small hands outstretched. A faint hum filled the air, and the streetlights flickered. Across the street, the van parked near the safe house went dark, its headlights and interior lights shutting off simultaneously. "It worked," Trevor said, his voice filled with awe. Weaver gave a small nod. "Let's move." Inside the safe house, Weaver retrieved the drive from a hidden compartment in the floor. He handed it to Trevor, his expression grave. "This has everything: names, dates, locations. Get this to the press, and Genesis is finished." "What about you?" Trevor asked, pocketing the drive. "I'll buy you time," Weaver said simply. "They're here for me, not you." Trevor shook his head. "No. We're doing this together." Before Weaver could argue, a loud crash echoed through the building. The operatives had found them. "Go!" Weaver shouted, drawing his weapon. "Take Eleanor and run." Trevor hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to fight, but Eleanor's hand tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered. "We have to go." With a heavy heart, Trevor nodded. "Stay safe, Weaver." He led Eleanor out through a back exit, the sound of gunfire ringing in his ears as Weaver held off their pursuers. Trevor's heart ached, but he focused on the task at hand. He had to get Eleanor and the drive to safety. Hours later, Trevor sat in a quiet newsroom, the encrypted drive in the hands of an investigative journalist. The files Weaver had collected were damning, implicating Genesis and several high-ranking officials in crimes that would rock the nation. As the journalist began reviewing the data, Trevor turned to Eleanor, who sat beside him, her small hands clutching a cup of hot cocoa. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes filled with both relief and sadness. "What about Mr. Weaver?" Trevor hesitated, his throat tightening. "He gave us a chance to stop them. He knew what he was doing." A tear slid down Eleanor's cheek, but she nodded. "He was brave." Days later, the news broke, sending shockwaves across the country. Genesis was dismantled, its executives arrested, and the victims' stories finally brought to light. Eleanor and Lucinda were placed with loving families, their futures no longer overshadowed by fear. As for Trevor, he returned to his work, but his life was forever changed. He kept a photograph of Eleanor and Lucinda on his desk, a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the courage it took to stand against the darkness. In his heart, he knew Weaver's sacrifice had not been in vain. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, they had triumphed. And for the first time in years, Trevor felt hope. The ending of this story leaves a powerful message about sacrifice, courage, and the fight for justice. Weaver's decision to stay behind, knowing the risks, showed the depth of his redemption arc. Trevor's determination to protect Eleanor and Lucinda despite impossible odds was a testament to the human spirit's capacity for hope and resilience. And Eleanor's quiet strength, her ability to take control of her own story, turned her from a victim into a hero. The victory was bittersweet, but it reflected the harsh reality of fighting against corruption and power. In the end, the light prevailed, but not without loss. This conclusion reminds us that while the battle for justice is never easy, it's always worth it. What did you think of the ending? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that inspire, shock, and keep you coming back for more.